Okay. So this is one I've intended to do for a long time, to tell you the truth. But there are always these concepts of things I could chatter on about. And yeah, I'm kind of swishing down because I can't reach the camera as well to readjust it. It won't mess my map up sitting on it. There are these topics that I want to cover, and it's not like I prepare for them or anything particularly. It's just a matter of, gosh, do I want to do this or not? And if I can talk myself out of it, because there's such a conceit to all of this, for me, I tend to. Even though I know some people enjoy them, something feels like a guilty pleasure about this in a way that doing the war games doesn't really. Oh well, doing any board games doesn't really. But anyway, back when I used to play Vampire the Masquerade, they had this concept of archetypes, where each character had they had an archetype and something else. I don't remember what it was, but I think the archetype was one of them was what you were internally, and one of them was what you present to the world. And it was kind of a nice way of expressing the kind of character you were. But it also came with a certain bonus, which was when certain things happened, you got, some kind of extra willpower bonus or something. I don't remember the system very well, but I tried to avoid the system as much as I could while running it, because I really enjoyed some of the concepts behind it. But anyway, in this particular case, you would get something regenerated if you managed to meet these goals for your archetype. And some of them were like gregarious or something like that. If you meet a new person or get into an interesting discussion or something, you get one of these points. They weren't always very great links to what they were. But one that, when it came up and somebody started doing it, I said, hey, wait, that's me, was Curmudgeon, which one of the reasons this delayed me so much was I wanted to make sure that, they don't really have it right. But what it was basically you predict something goes wrong, and if it does go wrong, you got this bonus. And the bonus was kind of cool, because if things are going, it was kind of a powerful one, because if things are going wrong, that's exactly when you need the bonus. When everything's going right, you don't really need to build up those bonuses. But, there was another one that was like an optimist or something like that who gets... I don't think that was, but because I think there was an optimist-pessimist pair. But the whole idea was, being able to just say, if you open that door, something terrible is going to happen. And it does. And then you immediately get this bonus. Now, as such a character, you're expected to kind of role-play in that status. But what's come up with a number of my posts and people who think that maybe I'm just one of these folk who, thinks that we're on the edge of disaster because of Trump. That's not the case. All my life, I've been a doom and gloom prophet. The interesting thing is, I tend to be right. And you can notice the world has gotten worse. I don't take blame for it. What I take is, anyone with any insight can kind of see what's going wrong and can predict the path. Am I always right? No, obviously not. And what's a more important thing is, quite often I've tended to be right, but missed the degree. Which is to say that what I see is happening, I tend to see as worse than certainly the perceived view of experts at the time, but also then where we go. Usually we're kind of splitting the difference, like the average of what people, what people in the know are saying and what I'm saying, not that I'm in the know, ends up kind of being where the needle hits. And I think that makes sense because, I do tend to have a fair amount of information, not tremendous, and I try to be honest when I don't know something. Although sometimes I do catch myself kind of blustering my way through a lack of knowledge. But I have a fair amount of knowledge about a lot of different things that I care about, at least. Yet I end up projecting further to the negative. And you might say, well, why is that? And it is kind of the equivalent to that archetype, which is this almost desire to be living in interesting times, to see things falling apart. I take a certain pleasure when I see my predictions coming even partially true, as opposed to something else. So, for example, there's aspects of global warming that, I think the science has it all wrong. I think that we're way underrepresenting the overall degree of change that we're going to be facing, because they're neglecting certain things in the models that are very troublesome. They're looking at the rate of change as it's gone, and looking just at the human impact or the carbon dioxide effect or whatever, and what they're missing is frozen methane deposits, and they're just not factoring them in. And those have the chance of really skyrocketing this very quickly, in a way that might be more difficult to handle than even sort of the direst predictions that are coming up. And similarly, I'm constantly seeing the decline of, the American political system and drawing parallels to the Roman Republic, where, or to the British Empire. I'm looking at the American Empire and comparing it to the British Empire, and seeing these parallels that don't necessarily mesh exactly, but I tend to view the negatives where they don't mesh as additive effects and have a harder time seeing any positive effects. Now, it's really hard to see a positive impact. So, if we look at the political situation from the time that I started growing up to now, it's always been kind of contentious at one level or another. Prior to where I kind of reached, not adulthood, but awareness, which happened, at around 9 or 10. There may have been periods where there wasn't quite so much contention. I don't know when, though. I mean, Goldwater Johnson, those ads were pretty negative against Goldwater. And you've got that whole race thing kind of baked in this period where I was, very young, where although maybe the majority of, certain classes of people were overall in agreement, and that those classes controlled all the major institutions of the government. So there was this similar worldview across the governing bodies and institutions, including the media, including, the major businesses that own our government, stuff like that. Well, that may be true, but there was still this conflict underneath that, shocked the shit out of people when it started coming out around the Vietnam War, around the race riots, around, the sexual revolution. All of that showed this real sharp divide that seems, almost astounding, right? And then my era of kind of coming to age was in the 80s. And, there was this reversal from conservatism, or towards conservatism, that I wasn't thrilled with or whatever, but there was, clearly this sharpening of what had been maybe a consensus among the ruling class for the last, 10, 15 years or whatever, because you have to remember, Nixon is the guy who started the EPA, right? I mean, the idea of a reasonable shared view of the world largely existed, at least in sort of the establishment of the parties at that point. And that reasonable view, what I call the reasonable view, because it was that pact of agreement, right? Helped glue things together, even if there was this seething mass of discontent, and out west people, who want to be able to use their the government land, honestly. But why is it the government land? Why is this land being, held in trust and not able to be developed and everything? Those are the real problems there. Why is the government imposing these restrictions? Why are they charging us to feed our cattle on it? All kind of odd things going on there. But, we should be free to use government land. That's like, keep the government's hands off my Social Security. Something seems very wrong to me about it. And maybe I'm just not catching something there, but yeah. But yeah, there seemed to be sort of this this overall idea and ideal that permeated through what was sort of the haves class. But we started seeing rollbacks and takeaways from like unionization happening there, and there was definite, and there were other factors coming into play during this same period: further automation, competition, foreign competition, our loss of the market share in the world, all kinds of things playing into this, causing additional stressors, bringing out where the interests were not so aligned. Now, the interesting thing on all that was we muddled through, right? we didn't fall apart completely and create the police state that maybe appeared to be happening during Clinton's presidency. We learned certain patterns, at least of the modern era, like Republicans are able to convince people that they're really good on the economy because they get a boost off of it. I'm kind of straying here, but they get a boost off of the prior administration's more careful and, should we say, watchdog attitude towards financial regulations, etc. But we've seen some really horrible things that, the consensus kind of went along with. Things like union busting, getting rid of the welfare state apparatus completely, and getting rid of these social, the safety net that, our society had kind of never caught up with Western Europe with, but Western Europe maybe went too far. But then the takebacks went in went in both places, and we fell back further in terms of being able to protect ourselves. And of course, that shows in the current crisis, right? That shows we are less capable of delivering the direct succor that's needed to the working class. And instead, all the money's going to the wealthy, as always. It's going to happen in any society. The people with power are going to fill their own pockets first. And it's just a question of, how big a power are you going to allow? How are you going to prevent big powers from growing? And you do that by creating a society that's at a low level of conflict with itself, so that there isn't this sort of full agreement to allow the power to all coalesce into one place, I think. But it has to be kind of a friendly situation, right? You can't outlaw unions. You can't make union organizing impossible, right? You can't make the needs of the environment and the people who need to be able to breathe the air and live directly in conflict with the needs of the moneyed classes. And by doing so, you actually, if you are creating that conflict, I think you end up seeing this kind of polarization that we see in our country. And we're seeing it elsewhere too at the same time. For similar reasons, to tell you the truth, where you see problems arising that allow for a greater grab of the popular opinion, with the idea of, if we hadn't been allowing, immigration to be happening to the degree that it was, we wouldn't be here. Well, most of it, as in most things in our human world, have less to do about facts always and more to do about salesmanship. How you sell something is more important than the actuality behind it, and that, that's a nonpartisan thing, honestly. It may seem partisan if you're looking at, hey, we're the ones who've been winning, and now you're blaming us on that. Man, don't worry about that. What it really comes down to is the nature of the way humans can make decisions on complex processes that are uninformed humans is they trust the message coming from others. So it's very important who the messenger is, how it's presented. That's why, my shit is never going to be of any importance, because it's never going to sway opinions, because I don't put it out in that glossy, clever fashion that's designed for that. I'm just here discussing, right? I'm not here trying to convince you of anything. I'm trying to share my view, which is simply not how our social decision-making processes work. When I'm really, really vitally invested in something, I still don't really try to persuade. I just basically tell people they're fucking idiots. And that's good enough for me, because I'm just fine. Hey, we're wrapping it back around to where it is. I'm just fine telling people, this is what you're going to get by following this path. This is the route you're on. Realize it. Own it. Deal with it. And you want an anti-institutionalist in there? Well, what are you doing? You're shaking things up to the degree that you might have enough chaos that human nature and the tendency to aggrandize your own power will be potentially free enough of the bindings that the institutionalized protections of these conflicting concepts that are shackling people from rising to, whatever they can reach. There's no question about that. They serve as a depressant. They prevent people from doing what they really want to do, from fully pursuing their happiness. But you know what? Some of that happiness is going to come at the misery of others. And in particular, if you're shackling an executive's capability to simply rule by fiat, well, yeah, you're reducing his capability to move to move very quickly and to align directly to the interests that fit maybe their base the best. But you're also endangering that entire social construct that is protecting us from tyranny. And there's certainly something to be said against institutions. I have no question about that. Having worked inside of them, I can tell you that they're fundamentally psychotic. If you viewed them as a person, if you viewed any large organization as a person trying to reach personal goals, they're fighting against themselves. They're doing things that don't make sense. They're wasting energy, etc. It's as if there's a disease in the body of that institution that it's constantly fighting against. And it's not clear which side, if any particular one is where the institution should be. There's sort of this balance of competing factors within it, and you kind of hope it's lurching in the right direction and doing not too much harm to society as a whole. But if you viewed, say, a corporation, a large corporation, as a person, you would probably say, well, look, this person is willing to do anything they can get away with to meet their primary goal. Their primary goal being increased shareholder value. That's pretty much what corporations have been, defined as in the modern era. It's not always been that way, and it may not always again. But if that's their primary goal, if they're fiduciarily I'm trying to think of the right word here. I want to say not honest. That's not really the word. Inept is not the word. If they're neglecting their fiduciary responsibility to improve shareholder value, for almost any reason, they're going against the moral fundament upon which they're built. Now, we would never accept this in a human, because essentially what that would say is, yeah, your hitman, he's getting money for it, it's okay, right? Well, no, it's not okay because there's a law. Okay. But, certain kinds of neglect, etc., we don't have a proper punishment in those cases. And boy, again, we're wandering way off, aren't we, into subjects of other things. But again, when I see these conflicts, when I see the balance that maybe is hard fought to maintain some sort of equilibrium, tilting one way or another, I think the worst. When I see something that's an escalation of change, I'm going to see the worst. Because historically, it almost always is pretty damn bad. Are there exceptions? Sure. I was pleasantly surprised by the fall of the Soviet Union. That is not the result that I was predicting at all. Like I said, I've been real wrong a lot of times. I was actually expecting something, not a world war, but actually the collapse of world economy due to it, probably, due to the over-militarization. I was younger then. But yeah, from almost any angle, whatever I see as the good, I see the flaws in the path towards that very, very well. Even the imaginary flaws. Even the ones that are just my own. Alright. I'm going to send this up while the bitchies are bitching. And don't know what it is of value to anyone. Don't really care.